We're in the Brisa now on the top of Daf Tzadi Tesam Beis. We have a person who's a Safek Kohen, and on the tzad that he's a Kohen, he's not allowed to enter into a cemetery. V'enam nosim noshim. Now we're in a real bind. Who can this fellow marry? Or these two Sfekas? They can't marry Ksheros because it might be an Eved, and Eved is not allowed to marry Bas Psul. They can't marry Psulos, meaning a Shivcha, because they might be a Kohen, and he's not allowed to get married to a Shivcha. So I was wondering, could this Safek get married to a Gioris? And that would depend upon whether Kahal Gerim Nikrakol or Eino Nikrakol. But let's say we hold Eino Nikrakol, which would mean that a Gioris would be allowed to marry Psulei Kol. But again, on the time that he's an Eved, so I'm not sure if you're allowed to, if a Gioris is allowed to marry an Eved. I mean, that's a separate din of Kedesha, which would apply to a Gioris as it would apply to anyone. So I'm not sure. I get the impression here that these two children are stuck for life. I don't know. Next. Higdilu ataroves v'shicharu zed zeh. Right? We're going to get together the two owners, and each one will give a get shichur to both of these, well, actually, to one of the sons, each one to the other one. And he'll write the following tonight in the get. Im ani harav, if I'm the owner of this shivcha, Eved, vi'ata Eved, hareata ben b'chorin. So it's a shichral tanai that if you are my Eved, I'm being meshachar. What that means is that there's no longer a tzad of avdus. Now, after the get shichur is delivered, then the Eved becomes a ger. So he's a Safek ger, a Safek kohen. That's a whole different story. And therefore, nosim nashim are reuyus lekahuna. They could marry a woman who's not a grusha, not a chalutza. She's not prohibited to a kohen, because they have to be careful. Maybe they're kohenim. Einam etam lemesim. They can't go into a cemetery. V'imnitamu einam sof kimarban. We can't give the malchus for a kohen that was metami lemesim, because each one could say, "I'm not a kohen." V'einam ochlim b'truma. Right, an Eved Kohen who's mishtachrer, he's no longer owned by the Eved, by the Adon, and therefore there's no kinyan kaspo. He's not allowed to eat truma. So since each one is a suffix, maybe he's the Eved Shenishtachrer. He's enjoined from eating truma. V'im achlu, eino mishalmim keren v'chomish. So the Kohanim come and say, wait, you owe us a keren v'chomish because you ate out truma. But he has the right to say, I'm not a Kohen. I'm sorry. He has the right to say, I'm a Kohen. And therefore I don't want to pay keren v'chomish. But v'einam cholkim al agorin, when they divvy up the truma at the granary, he doesn't have a right to say, well, I want to be Makabal Truma because he might be the Eved Shenishtachler who doesn't eat Truma. But what do we do in this case? Mochen es ha-Truma b'domim shalahem. When them offers Truma from their own Tvua, these two Sveikos, they don't have to hand it over to the Kohen because each one has a right to say, I'm a Kohen. You bring a raya that I'm not a Kohen. Until you bring a raya that I'm not a Kohen, you have no rights to this truma. On the other hand, they can't eat the truma because there's a suffix that might be the Eved Shenishtachler. So what do we do in this case? We sell the truma on the open market to Kohenim, and the money is theirs. Now he has here a ritva We ask the following question. If there's a Sveika Doraisa, how can you sell the Truma? You might be stealing from Sheva Kahuna, and you're being Mavatal the Mitzvah Nesina. So the Dvar answers that the Pasuk says Yechayev in the Mitzvah Nesina, only addressing someone who's the Yisrael Vada. Here, he's the Yisrael Safek. And therefore, there's no Gezel here, until we know for sure he's the Yisrael who has to give the Truma to the Kohen. Then it says, V'yein cholki b'kodshei Hamikdash. But we have halacha of oros kodshim that are given as sort of like a payment, a tip to the Kohanim, and they would not be allowed, these fakers, to take away this chelik oros because they might be stealing from the Kohanim. V'yein nosim lahem kodshim. Now, when I read this, I thought it meant that, let's say, for example, chatos v'yocham is the boss's nechal l'zichrei kuhuna. But Rashi says, no, we're talking about bechar. This suffix has a bechar, or charabim hanitonim l'konim. And now we want him to cough up the bechar, because it's one of the matnas kuhuna. Is ein nosim lahem kodshim. V'yein motziin lahem shalahem yidehem. Let's say this suffix Kohen, suffix Eved has a bechar, or hechrimu churumim. Is ein motziin miyadam laseis l'kohanim el nishna lahem v'nei shekol echad omer ani Kohen. The burden of proof is upon you to prove that I'm not a Kohen. So if somebody already delivered kodshim to me, like somebody gave them a bechar, so we cannot force them to fork over the bechar, because they might be Kohen. Each one has the right to say, I'm a Kohen. When the Kohanim come to this person who's a suffix and they demand that he give them matnas kahuna like Zor l'chayim and Keva, he has a right to turn to them and say, well, maybe I'm a Kohen. Ubechoro, if one of them, of these fakers, has in his Eder, in his flock, he has a Bechar, is Yehei Roa Ad Sheyistayev. And then the Mishnah concludes with notes on all of Chumrei HaKohanim v'Chumrei Yisrael. What does it mean, Yehei Roa Ad Sheyistayev? We're talking now about a suffix bechar. On the one hand, we can't force him to fork over the bechar to the Kohen. And let the Kohen be makriv the bechar. Because a bechar tam, that's not a mum, is nechal rak l'kodim lo l'zor. He's a suffix Kohen. So what do we do with this bechar in his possession? He doesn't have to give it over to the Kohen, but it might have to do just bechar. And on the side that he's not a Kohen, he's not allowed to eat the basar of this bechar. So what do? We allow this Bechar to go out into the fields and swallow a nail and become a Balmum. And then you're allowed to shecht it and eat it, even for Zaret. So the Gemara right away asks, Mesu Aksherim, why do the Vadoim in our Mishnah get the name, the appellation Ksherim? We should call them Vadoim. Elahanach, the Bnei Tarovas, Mishum di Arav Lahu, Havilu Psulim. Are you going to tell me that because they were mixed up in its Tarovas, they considered Psulim? That doesn't make any sense. Amar Papa, Ema, Umesu Havadoim. Instead of the word Ksherim, to indicate that somebody's puzzle, substitute the word Vadoim, somebody who's a Vad. Very interesting to me that the Mishnah could have used the wrong word, or maybe there was a faulty gender. I don't know. The Mishnah says, Dafka. It has to be in that sequence. First Michlatz, and then Hodo Yibume. First Chalitza, and then Yibum. Aval Yibum Bereisha Lo. Why not? Why can't you start with Yibum? So what would be if Yibum came before Chalitza? That's impossible. Why? The Kapaga, the Yevamot Ashuk. Right? It could be that this woman's husband is not his brother. Right? He's one of the Sfekas. And she really needs Yibum and Chalitza, without which she's Yevamot Ashuk. So if he goes ahead and has a relationship with her, he might be violating the Sisulav of Losia Eish Samei. The Mishnah says that Kohenes Shenes Arva. Vlada, Bevlad Shivchasa, is Cholkim, Havlados, Chelik Echad Begorin. Right, to get one Chelik. Now the Gemara thinks that that's obvious because these Vlados are only worthy of one Chelik. Maybe we don't know which one, but Sacha Kol, the maximum, is one Chelik. The Gemara answers, Ema Chelek Ki Echad. That the Chiddush of the Mishnah is that they both have to come together and show up at the Goren in order to get that Chelek. But if one of them shows up without the other one, then we're not going to give him Truma. So let's go over this one more time. We have a halacha called Ein Cholkin Li Evans Machlokas Tanoim, according to one Shita, Elim Kein Rabo Imo. Because of the suffix, the chashash of Yalehu Liyuchsen. And Tnan, we have a Mishnah, Kimandi Omar Ein Cholkin Shum Li Eved Elim Kein Rabo Imo. And this is a subject of debate amongst the Tanoim. The Sanya we learned in the Bryce saying Cholkin Shumali Eved, Elam Ken Rabo Imo Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Because in the place of Rabbi Yehuda, they would be Male from Truma to Yuchsin. So if the Rav comes with him and accompanies him, then nobody's going to think that he's a kosher. Everyone knows he's an Eved. Yossi Omer Yochel Sheyomar, the suffix can say, Im Kohen Ani Tnei Li B'Shvil Atzmi. Im Eved Kohen Ani Tnu B'Shvil Rabbi. I deserve this truma. And therefore, he's going to be zakoi to take truma even if he comes alone to the Beis Hagorim. But apparently, in the place of Rav Yossi, they were not knowing to be malami liyuchsit, and think he's a kohen. Therefore, we can't be machalik truma to someone who's a suffix eved. The makom shel Rabbi Yehuda, shel Rabbi Yossi, lo hayumalim truma liyuchsit. They didn't assume a chazaka that he must be a kohen if we gave to him the matnas kuhun. So therefore, we're going to give the truma of the suffix eved based on the mimanachach that we said before. Either I get it because I'm a kohen or because I'm an eved of a kohen. And we don't have to worry about Ma'ila Mitrum Liyuchs, and no one's going to say that he's a kohen. Tanya Rabbi Lotzah Tzadok Miyamai Lo Hei Anati Ela Edus Achas Behelu Eved Lukun Alpi. I only had one shot in my life at Edus, a testimony, and based on my testimony, they took an Eved and they gave him the status of a kohen. Helu Salkataita. Can you take this literally? That based on Rabbi Lotzah, such a takola came about, and they assumed that this Eved was a kohen. Hashta be'emta shel tzaddik ben HaKadosh Baruch Hu maybe takol al yadam is tzaddikim v'atzmo lo kol shkein. Now this ein maybe takol al yadam in behemtum shel tzaddikim. That's a Gemara in Masechet Chulin regarding Chamoro shel Reb Pinchas ben Yoyer, who wouldn't eat the peros which were fine. Ela ema bikshu lahalos eved lekun alpi. They had a havamina of upgrading the status of an eved and giving him the status of a kohen based on my testimony. But at the end of the day, they found out that he was an eved, so everything's okay. Also, be asrei de Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara is trying to explain what are the backgrounds, what are the details of this story about Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer saw in the makom of Rabbi Yossi that they were giving out truma in the goren to the eved. The azal, the asid, the asrei, the Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Eliezer went and he testified to that effect in the makom of Rabbi Yehuda, where they were not malami truma liyuchs. There are 10 categories of individuals where we send the truma to their house, a home delivery, but not in the Beis Hagranos. They're not labnei dead, and tumtum androgynous because it's mos. But evet, veha isha, veha arel, veha tome. But no say isha sheino genesel, a Kohen who marries a woman who's psul lakuna. Kulam mishaglim levateyem. We send them a package of truma to their house, but in the Beis Hagoren we don't give them, and the Gemara is going to explain why. Chutz mi tamei, a tamei we're not allowed to send him truma because he'll be mitami the truma. And Vanosi Isha Sheno Geneslo, again, he's subject to a knas that he cannot accept truma at all. So to give truma to someone who's a lav bardas, l'chalik and truma goren, li'ene kol, that's already a shtickle bizayin. That's already a zilus in truma. And what about tumtum androgynous? Nami, same thing applies, that we don't want to give them truma. Why is that?